Okay, so, and my name is Rodrigo Olave. I work for the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute in Northern Ireland. And yeah, in terms of time, how much time we have? Say 15 minutes, Gerardo? All right, so okay, so then the first thing that I have to say is that I am here on behalf of a big consortium working within a project funded by the European Commission. And this project is called AGROMIX Project, and which is the title for today, is the climate resilience across a European long-term agroforestry experimental network from concept to practice. And I think we have all heard today quite a lot about agriculture. And we all know that in the UK and Ireland and the rest of Europe, agriculture is very intensive. So today, for me to talk about agroforestry, and I think the first thing that I should do is, because agroforestry is not a mainstream type of farming system, I have to define agroforestry. So then, for those that are familiar with agroforestry basically is just it's a combination of trees, livestock, and grass, and all combined together and working towards exactly the same agriculture to produce food. And some of the main environmental challenges that we have, you might agree or not, but I think the first one is to find ways of producing food in a sustainable way. The second one is greenhouse gas emission reduction in the whole of the planet. And another one is protecting biodiversity. And finally is how we manage pests and diseases. And those, I think, are quite clear challenges for the agriculture industry sector anyway. So then, and I think because agroforestry is not a mainstream farming system, we have to find ways of being more like sustainable and producing food. And I think this project is a collective effort with 28 organizations across Europe. We've been working for the last 4 years on this project. And today, I'm going to just give you a snapshot of some of the findings, some of the work we've been doing over the last 4 years. And basically using, I think the colleague from Canada mentioned long-term experimental sites, how expensive those are and how expensive to manage. And because we need those in order to predict and simulate. And the important thing here for the whole group is to deliver evidence base. So if agroforestry becomes a mainstream farming system, we need the evidence backing up those claims. So then we've been using 8 long-term experimental sites, agroforestry experimental sites, 2 in the UK, local Wakelands, and 2 in France, Lamartine and Resenclair, 1 in Spain, Majaras, and then 2 in Italy, Anino and Paganico, and then 1 in Switzerland. And some of those experimental sites are quite old. For example, the one in Lockall, is where I work, is the longest running experimental site in Europe. It was established in 1989. So then some of my work, I think my main work today is more related on forest genetics and greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. And I want to mention this because it's quite important when we talk about long-term experimental sites. And, oh, I have, which, that's the one, down. Oh, the other side. Okay, cheers. I want to show those photographs just to introduce you in the agroforestry long-term experimental work. And I think on your left, on the corner there, you see a photograph with myself and a predecessor in Northern Ireland, who is Jim McAdam. He started off in 1989, establishing the agroforestry experimental site as part of a UK network of agroforestry system. At the time, more than 35 years ago, the environmental challenges were quite different compared to today. So that's the value of keeping those experimental sites running today. So that's the typical agroforestry system in Northern Ireland. It varies depending where you are in Europe, Mediterranean, different climates, and so on. And then the other photograph is the team that today works on agroforestry and other areas. So then that's also is something that I wonder myself sometimes, what's going to happen in the next 10 years? That long-term experimental site will be here or no? Probably, I don't know, but we all scientists, researchers, we sort of think about that. So who is going to take it on and work with this and trying to predict what is going to happen in 10 or 15 years? So then now, in terms of going back to the agroforestry, the AGROMIX project, so I'm going to talk here about the evidence base that we need to say agroforestry is an option. It's an option for farmers, it's an option for industry, and it's an option for us to make the agriculture sector more sustainable. So biodiversity, the first question in the project is, can we measure biodiversity benefits in agroforestry system? So then we took all those 8 core sites long-term, and those were assessed for a biodiversity above ground, and also biodiversity below ground. In terms of the above ground, across the 8 sites, it was found that the number of birds in total across all 8 sites were 48. And in terms of number of bats, 10 different species, using a simple method, which is audio moth across all 8 sites. So it's quite clear there that the birds are more birds in agroforestry than open farmland. And also bats is the sort of silvopastoral more than forest. What about plant diversity? In plant diversity, also across all sites, we have that in silvo-arable system, the forest and monoculture are quite different in terms of plant diversity, but it's not clear in silvopasture. When I talk about silvo-arable, I talk about the combination of trees and agricultural crops. When I talk about silvopasture, it's the combination of trees, grass, and livestock, whether this is sheep or cattle. What about then below biomass, below ground soil, and what we did here was to use a technique that maybe some of you are familiar with is shotgun metagenomics. What we analyze all the DNA in soil samples at 10, 20 centimeters below ground across all sites. So what we are trying to find there is whether we have more biodiversity below ground in terms of species that are associated with carbon metabolism and nitrogen metabolism. So what is not clear here yet, but we are working still on those samples from across the whole site, is that At the moment, we think that the agroforestry system as such is a distinct habitat compared to a woodland and grassland system. So we see some differences there. So what about measuring climate resilience in agroforestry system? We are measuring climate resilience in the face of climate change. I'm going to give you only one example of this climate resilient measurement, which is using the temperature humidity index and only 3 sites, local, La Martine, and Tenuta di Paganico in Italy. So as you can see clearly, in local, the index exceed in August the threshold for the temperature humidity index. This is quite related to stress in animals. So then, and also the index also between day and night in France also shows some amplitude. And in Tenuta di Paganico, it's very clear when you see those cattle there, then is having a big effect in the stress level of animals. So then the next question was, when we have biodiversity, when we can measure climate resilience in terms of productivity, what we can then do is whether we can model climate resilience using these experimental sites across Europe. So to do that, we use 2 approaches, or actually it's only one approach, but mixing 2 elements in the research. The first one is to use the representative concentration pathway, and that is the climate change scenarios used to project greenhouse gas emission concentration in the future. So when you see there, and also very importantly, is already incorporated in the IPCC to do the inventory for every single country in the world. So then at the moment, you can see quite clear, I don't want to scare you, but we are on the pathway to RCP 8.5, which is a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So then the next approach was to use that in combination with a biophysical model, which is called Yield Safe, which is a model developed by colleagues in Cranfield University, and to predict the productivity of a system based on those parameters. It's just one example just to use because the colleagues are doing it for all sites across Europe. And saying this is one example using the local site in Northern Ireland. So then that's the site is fully replicated, 3 land use systems, grassland, agroforestry, and woodland, all planted at the same time, and then in 1989. And we've been using the data, the physical data of grass yield, tree growth, and carrying capacity of the system, and so on and so forth. So then that's and you have here a typical photograph of a agroforestry system working, where you have sheep grazing from April to October. And then on the other side, you have a typical silvo-arable system using planted hybrids of poplar. And the tree density is different because we have a agricultural crop in between. And then when that canopy closes, so then we have to change the system. So that's also is important because those type of systems are quite dynamic and also evolve depending what you use, what type of activity are in there. So this is a quick snapshot using the high yield safe model as well as the RCP scenario. So then you have here the compare relative to the baseline. You have quite a lot of more grass production and timber growth at those 8.4.5 and 8.5 RCP scenarios. So then that's quite interesting. And also it allows us to, in the future, to manage depending of the climate change scenarios and also in terms of the activities that we are doing. And then, okay, so then I say quite a lot about the, the benefits of agroforestry. But now, because I said before, because this system is not mainstream, what we would need to do for farmers industry to adopt the system. So I think one of the approaches here, led by our colleague in University of Extremadura in Spain, Susan Schnabel, and the idea here is to identify those regions with more environmental pressures. So those are there on those maps, and then initial results suggest that if in Europe the number of hectares planted go up to 10% compared to today, that would imply a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of about 45%. So then that's an interesting story, but it needs to be backed up with proper research. And once farmers, you think, are sort of open to adopt such a system, I think what we see is that we have also to identify what farmers, what industry are more sort of have the knowledge, whether it's there or not. And I think that's important because we need to adopt the system and we have to have the capacity to sort of collectively learn how these type of systems work. And then as part of the work in AGROMIX, is once the system is adopted and the system is in place working, we know that there are so many areas of agroforestry already in Europe, but interestingly, those areas are now incorporated within the greenhouse gas inventory of every country. So if you look at the LULUCF inventory, which is part of the greenhouse gas inventory, so in the LULUCF inventories, only we have 8 classifications of land use: forest land, wetland, cropland, grassland. I was about to ask you about that, how you account for the conversion from cropland to grassland. But anyway, so we will go back to that point later. And the point here is how there are two very important aspects that we are working on at the moment. And I think the project is finished in October. So then I think we have enough time to find. The first is to classify the agroforestry system as an habitat. For that to be incorporated in the greenhouse gas inventory, in the LULUCF specifically, we need a definition of a habitat. And also that definition of this agroforestry system habitat must come also with activities associated to it. So then we allow us to work out exactly the removals and the emissions from the system to be accounted in the inventory. So that's some of the outputs of this project too. So conclusion, just to finish, I think we all want to have lunch, but anyway, so then agroforestry increases biodiversity. It's quite clear in terms of birds and bats, and we will see the story later in terms of below ground biomass. And agroforestry improves microclimate and welfare. This is quite clear. And also silvo-arable system can help stabilizing crop yield under climate change. And also as I said before, it's no an extension extensification measure. So increase biodiversity while adding other environmental benefits. And finally, for the scenarios of RCP 0.45 and 8.5, which is the worst scenario, some of those agroforestry can provide a level of protection. And finally, I would like to acknowledge and thank all those colleagues across Europe, as well as people here organizing this event. Thanks.
Thanks for your presentation. Just in the Canadian prairies, especially in Saskatchewan, we have a lot of shelter belts and they get to the end of their lifetime, but we see also, or at least some experts pursue damage in the trees from glyphosate spreads. And so I'm wondering, in arable systems, how do we ensure basically tree survivability, especially with the previous presentation on herbicide resistance from weeds, and that seems to be our only control, or is there ways?
Yeah, well, so then I think the experience that we have from the experimental work in the UK, because those silvoarable system or shelter belts are also replicated in some parts of England. And I think it's trying to match suitability in terms of soil conditions and weather conditions. We know that this is not a silver bullet or something like that. This is just something specific for specific areas. We're not trying here to promote something that is going to sort of change the agriculture industry as such. It's trying to be more efficient. It's trying to improve those or work towards those environmental challenges that I mentioned before, pest and disease management and biodiversity. I have personally quite a bit of also experience working on shelter belts in the Falkland Island in this South Atlantic. Because it's a bit similar probably, but I've never been around that area. But the logic behind planting shelter belts in the Falkland was that it's a tree-less archipelago. So then for the sheep industry, for wool production, it was perfectly done, and I think it's feasible. But it's just for certain areas, just to mitigate sort of the more extensive, in that case, extensive agriculture compared to, say, intensive agriculture that we have here, probably more similar to what is happening in Canada. Here?
The DHR.
Oh, say again.
How do you define?
Oh, define it as solely one single number that is reflects that index to the stress level of an animal. That's is based on literature, those indexes, and then it's just having the weather over a certain time. The weather, how that weather varies between one point and to the point that is being assessed.
How do you calculate it?
I don't remember. I think was I don't remember the index, but yeah, there is it's on a paper there. Yeah.
We are not of the time.
And in the case of agroforestry, the products for log wool are wool, meat, and grass yield and timber production. And those in the other sites across Europe, say for example in France, also was similar. We're comparing like with like in sheep against sheep in log wool, and those between in Spain and Italy are working with meat from large animals, in this case cattle, and those are the sort of basic productivity variables, so meat and grass yield, timber volume. Sorry? Not really. We are just working on the sort of average economic data that we have from those, but the study doesn't look into whether they are in a sort of a special different sort of market situation rather than the conventional one. Yeah, yeah.
Question. Which of the water is high tree density that includes shading, which of course impairs the connectivity? How does this involve in the modeling? Does it say that trees and the grass?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because say, for example, in the case of local, those experimental sites using in silvopastoral system were planted at 5 by 5, which is 400 trees per hectare. So then we found that year 13, at that specific density, the grass yield decreases consistently. So that's the first point, that we have to thin out and remove a percentage of the trees to get the system back into the similar grass production. And then, so for example, we started off with 400 trees per hectare, but after 35 years, now we are at 100 trees per hectare. So more than, but and also there is a commercial benefit of that, because all that timber can be utilized for, say, biomass or other products.